It was one of those crisp autumn mornings when the air feels just right cool enough to make you want a warm cup of tea, but not so cold that you need to bundle up. In a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., an elderly woman stepped out onto her porch. Her name wasn't important to most people around her. She liked it that way. To them, she was just another friendly face who waved hello as they passed by. But if they knew who she really was, their jaws would drop. This woman was no ordinary resident. She had spent decades serving as a judge on the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court. Yet, despite all her achievements, titles, and accolades, what mattered most to her these days was living a peaceful life surrounded by things she loved. And topping that list was Max, her golden retriever. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. He had been with her through thick and thin, from late night walks after long days at work to lazy Sunday afternoons curled up together on the couch. His wagging tail could light up even the darkest of moods. For someone whose job often involved making tough decisions about life and death matters, coming home to Max was like stepping into a world where everything made sense again. That morning, the sun peeked over the horizon, casting soft golden light across the neatly trimmed lawns. Birds chirped cheerfully, and the smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the air. It was the kind of morning that reminded her how beautiful life could be when you slowed down and paid attention. She grabbed Max's leash from its usual spot near the door and called out to him. "Come on, boy, let's go for our walk." Max came bounding toward her, his eyes sparkling with excitement. If dogs could smile, Max would have had the biggest grin in the world. Together, they set off down the street, following their usual route a loop around the block that took them past rows of charming houses, blooming flower beds, and towering oak trees shedding their leaves in preparation for winter. As they walked, she couldn't help but feel grateful for moments like this. Life hadn't always been easy. There were challenges along the way, long hours at work, difficult cases, and the weight of responsibility that came with being a trailblazer in a field dominated by men. But now, in her 70s, she cherished the simplicity of her daily routine. Walking with Max gave her time to think, reflect, and breathe. The neighborhood seemed especially peaceful that day. A few neighbors were outside tending to their gardens, waving as she walked by. Children played on the sidewalk, laughing and chasing each other with leaves in hand. Everything felt normal, almost too perfect. Little did she know, this calm would soon shatter in a way she never expected. Back at the local police station, things weren't quite as serene. Earlier that morning, dispatch had received a call reporting suspicious activity in the area. The details were vague: a person seen wandering between houses, acting strangely, but it was enough to send officers scrambling to investigate. 2. Patrol cars were dispatched to check it out, instructed to stay alert and approach with caution. One of those cars happened to be heading in the direction of her street. Unaware of the storm brewing nearby, she and Max turned back toward home, enjoying the last stretch of their walk. As they approached her driveway, she noticed something unusual, a squad car pulling up slowly behind them. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police cars weren't uncommon in the neighborhood, and she assumed they were simply patrolling. But then 2 officers stepped out, guns drawn, shouting commands that sent a chill down her spine. "Ma'am, get back inside." One of them yelled, confused and startled. She froze, unsure of what was happening. Max, sensing her distress, began barking loudly, trying to protect her. What happened next would change her life forever and shine a spotlight on issues far bigger than either of them. The sound of barking filled the air as Max stood between his owner and the 2 officers. His tail wagged furiously, but his body was tense, ready to defend her if needed. To anyone who knew him, it was clear that Max wasn't aggressive, was just a loyal dog doing what he thought was right. But to the officers standing there with their guns drawn, the scene looked very different. "Ma'am, stay back." One of them shouted again, his voice sharp and commanding. She raised her hands instinctively, trying to show she meant no harm. "It's okay," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "This is my dog. He's not dangerous," but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officers were focused, their eyes locked on Max, who continued to bark. In that moment, they weren't seeing a friendly golden retriever, they were seeing a potential threat. Their training kicked in, overriding reason or logic. One of them took a step forward, pointing his weapon directly at Max. "No, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "He's just protecting me." Before she could say another word, the shot rang out. Time seemed to stop. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through the quiet neighborhood, startling birds from nearby trees, and sending a wave of shock through everyone present. Max let out a yelp, his body crumpling to the ground. Blood began to pool beneath him almost instantly. Her knees buckled as she dropped to the pavement beside him. "Max!" she cried, her voice raw with anguish. She reached out to touch him, her hands trembling as she tried to comfort him. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered his name over and over, hoping against hope that he would respond, but Max didn't move. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the officers seemed frozen, their weapons still pointed at the motionless dog. Then, slowly, reality began to sink in for all of them. One of the officers lowered his gun, his expression shifting from alertness to confusion. "Ma'am, He stammered, unsure of what to say. It was then that the other officer noticed something, a small pin on her lapel. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking closely. But once he saw it, his eyes widened. In disbelief. "Wait," he muttered under his breath, turning to his partner. "Do you know who this is?" The first officer shook his head, still trying to process what had just happened. "That's Justice Harper," the second officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's on the Supreme Court." The weight of those words hit them like a punch to the gut. They had just shot the dog of one of the most powerful figures in the country, a woman whose decisions shaped laws and influenced millions of lives. And worse, they hadn't even realized who she was until it was too late. Justice Harper didn't hear any of this. She was too consumed by grief, clutching Max's lifeless body close to her chest. Her mind raced with questions. Why had this happened? What had they been thinking? How could anyone mistake her sweet, harmless dog for a danger? Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some gasped when they saw the blood-stained pavement. Others pulled out their phones to record the scene. Within minutes, videos started circulating online, capturing the chaos and spreading it far beyond the confines of the quiet suburban street. Back at the police station, news of the incident traveled fast. Dispatchers buzzed with updates, and supervisors scrambled to figure out how to handle the situation. Calls poured in from concerned citizens, demanding answers. Local news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the elderly woman kneeling beside her dog, her face streaked with tears. By evening, the entire nation was talking about it. Social media erupted with outrage. People shared posts calling for accountability, questioning why such a tragedy had occurred. Protesters gathered outside the police department holding signs that read, "Justice for Max and protect our elders." Meanwhile, Justice Harper retreated into her home, shutting out the world. She couldn't bear to look at the spot where Max had fallen, nor could she bring herself to answer the endless stream of phone calls and messages flooding her inbox. Friends and colleagues reached out, offering support, but she declined every offer. All she wanted was to be alone with her thoughts and her pain. That night, as she sat in her living room surrounded by photos of Max, she found herself reflecting on the events of the day. It wasn't just the loss of her beloved companion that weighed heavily on her heart. It was the realization of how easily things could go wrong. If this could happen to her, a respected judge with decades of experience navigating complex systems, what did it mean for others who didn't have the same privileges? As the hours ticked by, her grief began to transform into something else, determination. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but she also knew she couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about Max anymore, it was about something much bigger. And so, as dawn broke the next morning, Justice Harper made a decision. She would use her voice not just to seek justice for Max, but to shine a light on the systemic issues that allowed such tragedies to occur in the first place. Little did she know, her journey was only just beginning. The days following the shooting felt like a blur. Justice Harper tried to stay indoors, shutting out the chaos outside her home, but the world had other plans. News of the incident spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Neighbors who witnessed the event talked to reporters, sharing their shock and anger. Videos recorded by bystanders went viral online, showing the heartbreaking moment when Max was shot and the elderly woman's raw grief afterward. Social media exploded with outrage, turning what happened on that quiet suburban street into a national conversation. People couldn't stop talking about it. How could this happen? Why did the officers react so quickly with lethal force? And how could they not recognize who she was, or at least take a moment to assess the situation before pulling the trigger? These questions echoed across news channels, talk shows, and community forums. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Max and Black Lives Deserve Better." For Justice Harper, though, the noise outside was almost unbearable. She spent most of her time sitting alone in her living room, surrounded by photos of Max. There was one picture in particular that she kept looking at, a close-up of his face, his golden fur glowing in the sunlight, his eyes full of love and loyalty. Every time she glanced at it, tears welled up in her eyes. She missed him more than words could express. Her phone rang, constantly calls from friends, colleagues, activists, and even strangers offering condolences or asking for interviews. But she ignored them all. Talking about what happened felt impossible. How could she put into words the depth of her pain? How could she explain that losing Max wasn't just losing a pet, it was losing a piece of herself? Still, she knew she couldn't hide forever. The weight of her position, the fact that she was a Supreme Court judge, meant people expected her to say something. They wanted answers, clarity, and leadership. But right now, all she wanted was peace. Meanwhile, the police department was scrambling to contain the fallout. The two officers involved in the shooting were placed on administrative leave while an internal investigation got underway. Their names weren't released publicly, but that didn't stop the public from demanding accountability. Some called for criminal charges. Others argued that the entire system needed to change. At a press conference held a few days after the incident, the police chief stood in front of a crowd of reporters, looking visibly uncomfortable. He apologized for what had happened, calling it a tragic mistake. "We deeply regret the loss of the dog and the distress caused to the individual involved," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Our officers are trained to protect and serve, but we acknowledge that mistakes can occur. We are committed to ensuring that this does not happen again." His apology fell flat for many. Critics pointed out that apologies weren't enough, they wanted action. Activists demanded reforms in policing practices, especially when it came to interactions with animals and marginalized communities. Others highlighted the racial undertones of the incident, noting that if this could happen to someone as prominent as a Supreme Court judge, what hope did ordinary citizens have? As the debate raged on, Justice Harper began to emerge from her solitude, not because she wanted to, but because she felt a responsibility to speak up. One evening, sitting alone in her study, she picked up a pen and started writing. At first, it was just notes, thoughts jotted down as they came to her. But soon, those notes turned into something bigger. She wrote about Max, describing the joy he brought into her life and the void his absence left behind. She wrote about the fear she felt during the shooting and the helplessness of watching something precious being taken away without warning. And then she shifted her focus outward, addressing the larger issues at play. "What happened to me is not unique," she wrote. "It is a reflection of a system that fails to value Black lives, whether human or animal. It is a reminder that trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve is broken, and that rebuilding it will require more than empty promises." Her words poured onto the page with a clarity and passion that surprised even her. Writing became a form of therapy, helping her process her grief while also channel. It had been weeks since the shooting, and Justice Harper finally felt ready to step back into the public eye. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever, not when what happened to her had become a symbol of something much bigger. The world was watching, waiting to see what she would do next. And so, one crisp morning, she walked out of her home with purpose in her steps, her head held high despite the weight of everything she'd been through. Her first move was unexpected but powerful. Instead of giving interviews or making statements, through lawyers, she decided to address the nation directly. With the help of a small team of trusted advisors, she prepared for a televised speech, one that would be broadcast live across multiple networks. It wasn't just about sharing her story. It was about using her platform to spark real change. The day of the speech arrived, and cameras lined up outside her modest home. Reporters and camera crews buzzed with anticipation, their questions flying at anyone who dared to step near them. Inside, Justice Harper sat quietly, reviewing her notes one last time. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses, but her voice remained steady when she finally stepped onto the stage, behind the podium. She looked smaller than people expected, frail even, but there was an undeniable strength in her presence. When she began to speak, the room fell silent. "What happened to me is not unique," she started, her voice calm yet filled with emotion. "It is a reflection of a system that devalues black lives, whether human or animal. My dog, Max, was more than just a pet. He was family. He brought light into my life during some of my darkest moments. Losing him has left a void I cannot describe." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But this isn't just about Max. This is about every person who has ever felt powerless in the face of authority. This is about every community that has lost trust in those sworn to protect them. This is about the countless incidents where fear overrides reason, where assumptions lead to tragedy, and where accountability feels like an impossible dream." Her words resonated deeply. People leaned closer to their screens, hanging on every sentence. Some wiped away tears, while others nodded in agreement, feeling seen and heard for the first time. Justice Harper didn't stop there. She outlined specific steps she believed were necessary to prevent similar tragedies in the future. She called for stricter protocols around the use of lethal force, especially involving animals. She emphasized the need for better training for officers, focusing on de-escalation tactics and recognizing implicit bias. She also urged lawmakers to create independent oversight boards to review police conduct and hold officers accountable. "When things went wrong, we must demand transparency," she said firmly. "We must push for reforms that prioritize humanity over fear. And we must remember that true justice is not just about punishing mistakes, it's about preventing them from happening in the first place." When she finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause. Even those who disagreed with her ideas couldn't deny the power of her message. Her speech became a rallying cry, inspiring people across the country to take action. Activists organized marches, calling for systemic changes in policing. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at implementing the reforms she suggested. Community groups hosted town hall meetings to discuss ways to rebuild trust between residents and law enforcement. But Justice Harper didn't stop with just one speech. In the weeks that followed, she traveled to different cities, meeting with activists, politicians, and everyday citizens. She listened to their stories, many of which mirrored her own pain and frustration. One woman tearfully recounted how her son had been wrongfully arrested because of racial profiling. A young man shared how his family's dog had been killed by police under similar circumstances years ago. Each story fueled her determination to keep fighting. Her efforts weren't without challenges. Critics accused her of being too emotional, arguing that she should focus on legal matters rather than social issues. Others claimed she was exaggerating the problem, insisting that most officers acted responsibly. But Justice Harper refused to back down. "I've spent my career interpreting laws and ensuring fairness," she responded during one interview. "But laws mean nothing if they don't protect everyone equally. If we want a society based on justice, we have to start by addressing the inequalities that exist within our systems." Her persistence paid off. Slowly but surely, her advocacy began to make an impact. Several states passed legislation requiring mandatory training for officers on handling encounters with animals. Cities implemented new policies mandating body cameras for all law enforcement personnel. Grassroots organizations launched campaigns to educate communities about their rights and how to interact safely with police. Through it all, Justice Harper kept Max's memory alive. She spoke about him often, sharing stories of his loyalty and love. She even helped establish a foundation in his name, dedicated to promoting kindness and understanding between humans and animals. The foundation funded programs to teach children empathy toward animals and provided resources for families struggling to cope with the loss of a beloved pet. As momentum grew, Justice Harper found herself surrounded by supporters who admired her courage and resilience. Strangers sent her letters, thanking her for speaking up, saying her words gave them hope. Friends and colleagues rallied behind her, offering encouragement and assistance whenever she needed it. Still, she never forgot why she started this journey in the first place. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she would sit by the window and look out at the empty street where Max used to play. Sometimes she imagined hearing his bark or feeling the soft brush of his fur against her leg. Those moments reminded her of how far she'd come and how much work still lay ahead. Justice Harper knew the road to meaningful change wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that giving up wasn't an option. For Max, for herself, and for everyone else affected by similar tragedies, she vowed to keep pushing forward. And so, with unwavering resolve, she continued to fight not just for justice, but for a brighter, fairer future. The trial was set to begin months after the shooting, but the anticipation leading up to it felt like an eternity. Justice Harper had spent countless nights preparing herself for what lay ahead. She knew the courtroom would be filled with cameras, reporters and spectators eager to witness history unfold. This wasn't just a case about one dog or two officers. It was a test of accountability, fairness, and whether justice could truly prevail in a system that often seemed rigged against those who needed it most. On the morning of the trial, she woke up early, her mind racing with thoughts of Max. She glanced at the framed photo of him on her bedside table, his golden fur glowing in the sunlight, his eyes full of trust and love. "You'll always be with me," she whispered softly. As if speaking directly to him, she dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that reflected both her dignity and her role as a public figure. Her black suit was simple yet elegant, paired with a pin shaped like a paw print, a tribute to Max. As she stepped out of her house, reporters swarmed her driveway, shouting questions from behind barricades. "Your Honor, how are you feeling today? What do you hope to achieve from this trial? Do you believe justice will be served?" She offered no answers, only a quiet nod before climbing into the car that waited to take her to the courthouse. The ride was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio escorting her convoy. When they arrived, the scene outside the courthouse was chaotic. Protesters held signs demanding justice, while supporters chanted slogans calling for reform. Television crews set up their equipment ready to broadcast every detail of the proceedings. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Seats were filled with lawyers, witnesses, family members of the officers involved, and members of the public lucky enough to secure a spot. Justice Harper took her seat near the front, flanked by her legal team. Her presence commanded respect. Even the judge paused briefly to acknowledge her arrival. The atmosphere shifted when the defendants, the two officers, entered the room. They looked nervous, avoiding eye contact with anyone as they sat down. Beside their attorneys, the prosecution opened the case, presenting evidence that painted a grim picture of what happened that day. Witnesses testified about the events leading up to the shooting, describing how Justice Harper and Max had been walking peacefully when the officers approached with guns drawn. One neighbor recounted hearing her pleas for them to stop, her voice trembling with fear. Another described the shock and horror of seeing Max collapse, blood pooling beneath him. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Justice Harper's turn to testify. When she rose from her seat and walked to the stand, the room fell silent. Her steps were deliberate, her posture upright, her expression calm but resolute. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. As she began to speak, her words carried a mix of strength and vulnerability. She recounted the details of that fateful morning, the peaceful walk with Max, the sudden appearance of the squad car, the shouts from the officers, and the deafening sound of the gunshot. Her voice cracked slightly when she described finding Max lying motionless on the ground, his warm body growing cold in her arms. "I tried to explain," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I told them he was just a dog, my companion, my friend, but they didn't listen. They acted without thinking, without considering the consequences of their actions." Her testimony struck a chord with everyone in the room. Some jurors wiped away tears, while others scribbled notes furiously. Even the defense attorney seemed momentarily shaken by the raw emotion in her words. The defense countered by arguing that the officers had acted within the scope of their duties. They claimed the vague reports of suspicious activity justified their aggressive approach and that Max's barking had escalated the situation. Expert witnesses testified about standard police procedures, emphasizing the challenges officers face when responding to uncertain threats. For days, the courtroom became a battleground of perspectives. Prosecutors highlighted the lack of clear communication between the officers and Justice Harper, questioning why lethal force was used so quickly. Defense attorneys argued that the officers' actions were reasonable under the circumstances, pointing to the inherent risks of law enforcement work. Finally, after weeks of arguments and deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom tensed as the foreperson stood to deliver the decision. "We find Officer A not guilty of all charges," the foreperson announced, pausing briefly as murmurs rippled through the crowd. "We find Officer B guilty of misdemeanor charges related to improper use of force." The split verdict left everyone divided. Supporters of Justice Harper cheered the conviction of one officer but criticized the acquittal of the other. Critics of the system pointed out that the punishment seemed inadequate given the gravity of the offense. Meanwhile, the officers' families expressed relief and frustration, depending on which side of the verdict they supported. For Justice Harper, the outcome was bittersweet. On one hand, she appreciated that some measure of accountability had been achieved. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the system had fallen short once again. After the trial ended, she returned home, exhausted but determined. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. While the trial had brought attention to the issue, it hadn't solved the deeper problems plaguing law enforcement and society as a whole. That evening, she sat alone in her living room staring at the empty space where Max used to lie. She thought about everything that had happened. The shooting, the protests, the speeches, the trial, and realized that none of it would bring him back. But maybe, just maybe, it could prevent similar tragedies from happening to others. With renewed resolve, she picked up her pen and began drafting another speech. This time, she wanted to focus on solution-specific changes that could make policing safer, fairer, and more humane. She envisioned a future where encounters like hers wouldn't end in violence, where communities trusted the people meant to protect them, and where no one else would have to endure the pain she felt. As she wrote, she allowed herself to dream of a world where Max's memory inspired lasting change. It wouldn't come easily, but she was willing to keep fighting for him, for herself, and for everyone counting on her to lead the way. Months had passed since the trial, but its echoes lingered in every corner of society. Justice Harper didn't let herself rest after the verdict. Instead, she channeled her energy into something bigger, something that could outlast her own life. She knew the fight for justice wasn't just about one case or one dog. It was about creating a world where such tragedies wouldn't happen again. And so, with determination burning in her heart, she stepped onto the national stage once more, this time not as a victim, but as a leader. Her first major move came when she accepted an invitation to testify before Congress. It was a rare opportunity, and she prepared meticulously, determined to make every word count. On the day of her testimony, she stood before lawmakers, her presence commanding respect even in a room filled with powerful figures. Cameras rolled as she began to speak, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "What happened to me is not unique," she said, repeating the words that had become her rallying cry. It is a reflection of a system that fails too many people, especially those who look like me. My story is not just about a dog named Max. It's about trust, accountability, and humanity. She went on to outline specific reforms she believed were necessary to prevent similar incidents in the future. She called for stricter regulations around the use of lethal force, especially involving animals. She pushed for mandatory training programs that focused on de-escalation tactics and cultural sensitivity. She urged lawmakers to create independent oversight boards to review police conduct and ensure transparency. We must demand better from our systems. She continued, her tone firm but compassionate. Better training, better policies, and better outcomes. We owe it to ourselves, to our communities, and to future generations to build a world where everyone feels safe. Her words resonated deeply, earning applause from both sides of the aisle. Lawmakers listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others jotting down notes. Her testimony sparked debates, discussions, and ultimately action. Several states introduced legislation based on her recommendations, while federal lawmakers began drafting bills aimed at implementing nationwide reforms, but Justice Harper didn't stop there. She traveled across the country, speaking at town halls, universities, and community centers. Everywhere she went, she met people eager to share their stories of loss, fear, and frustration. A young woman tearfully recounted how her family's dog had been shot by police years ago, leaving scars that never fully healed. An elderly man described being profiled and harassed simply because of the color of his skin. Each story reinforced her belief that change was not only necessary but urgent. Her advocacy inspired a wave of grassroots movements activists launched. Campaigns calling for reforms, organizing marches and rallies in cities nationwide. Statues of golden retrievers began appearing in parks and public spaces, each accompanied by plaques bearing Max's name and the message, "In memory of those who remind us to love, protect, and strive for a better world." The foundation she helped establish in Max's honor became a beacon of hope for countless families. It funded programs teaching children empathy toward animals, provided resources for grieving pet owners, and offered scholarships to students pursuing careers in law enforcement reform. The foundation also created a hotline for people to report incidents of animal-related violence, ensuring that no one felt powerless in the face of injustice. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Critics argued that reforms would weaken law enforcement, making it harder for officers to do their jobs effectively. Some accused Justice Harper of overstepping her role, claiming she should focus on legal matters rather than social issues. But she refused to back down. "I've spent my career interpreting laws and ensuring fairness," she responded during one interview. "But laws mean nothing if they don't protect everyone equally. If we want a society based on justice, we have to start by addressing the inequalities within our systems." Her persistence paid off. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to bear fruit. Several states passed legislation requiring mandatory training for officers on handling encounters with animals. Cities implemented new policies mandating body cameras for all law enforcement personnel. Independent oversight boards were established to review police conduct and hold officers accountable when things went wrong. Through it all, Justice Harper kept Max's memory alive. She spoke about him often, sharing stories of his loyalty and love. She visited schools, talking to children about the importance of kindness not just toward animals, but toward one another. She encouraged them to dream big, to believe in their ability to create change, and to never underestimate the power of compassion. As the years went by, her legacy grew. Books were written about her journey, documentaries chronicled her fight for justice, and murals depicting her alongside Max appeared in neighborhoods across the country. People began referring to her not just as a judge, but as a symbol of resilience and hope. Still, she remained humble. When asked about her accomplishments, she always redirected the conversation to Max. "None of this would have been possible without him," she said during one interview. "He taught me what it means to love unconditionally, to stand by someone no matter what. If I've done anything worthwhile, it's because of him." In her later years, Justice Harper returned to the quiet life she had cherished before the tragedy. She spent her days tending to her garden, reading books, and walking along the same streets where she and Max used to stroll. Though the pain of losing him never fully disappeared, she found peace in knowing that his memory had sparked something meaningful, a movement toward a better, fairer world. One evening, as the sun set over her neighborhood, she sat on her porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze brush against her face. For a moment, she imagined hearing Max's bark, feeling the soft touch of his fur against her hand. "You did good, boy," she whispered, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You did good." And as she sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the world she had helped shape, she felt a sense of fulfillment, not because the work was done, but because she had played a part in lighting a flame that would burn brightly for generations to come.